She was not the kind of woman people noticed in an airport. She wore no designer clothes, no first-class ticket or entourage rushing behind her. Her name was Clara James, a simple black woman in her late 20s, carrying a worn handbag and an old suitcase with a broken wheel that squeaked loudly across the marble floor. She had saved for this ticket for almost a year. It was her first real trip outside her home state. This flight meant everything for her. It was a job interview that could change her life, a chance to step out of cleaning houses and finally put her degree to use. Every second mattered. The announcement echoed, "Final boarding for Flight 728. Doors closing in 5 minutes." Clara's heart pounded. She picked up her pace, dragging the squeaky suitcase, weaving past businessmen with sleek laptops and tourists with shiny passports. And then she saw him. An old man, bent over his cane, struggling near the security checkpoint. His papers had scattered across the floor, blowing in the rush of passing feet. People stepped around him. A few glanced, then looked away. No one stopped. Clara froze. She looked at the gate. She looked at the man. The seconds ticked in her ears like a clock striking doom. If she stopped, she'd miss her flight. If she kept going, she'd secure her future. Her chest tightened. She remembered her mother's words. Titles and money mean nothing if you forget kindness. So Clara let out a shaky sigh, bent down, and gathered the man's papers. "Here, sir," she said gently, helping him to his feet. His hands trembled as he took the documents. His eyes, a faded blue, sharp yet weary, locked on hers. "Thank you, child," he rasped. "No one ever stops anymore." Clara forced a smile, hiding the panic twisting inside her. She stayed until he was steady, even though she knew what it meant. When she finally sprinted to her gate, breathless and desperate, the agent shook her head. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The doors are closed." The plane roared outside the window. Her dream job, gone. Clara sank into a seat, her chest hollow. All because she had stopped, or so she thought. Clara sat in the terminal, staring at the plane pulling away from the gate. Her chest burned. Months of scrubbing floors, of working double shifts, of saving every spare penny gone in a single choice. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her worn handbag. What did I just do? She wanted to cry, but instead, she forced herself to breathe. "It's fine. Another flight. I'll explain. Maybe they'll understand." She got up and headed for the airline desk. The young attendant barely glanced at her as she spoke. "I just missed my flight. Can I rebook? I have an interview tomorrow morning." The attendant cut her off with a rehearsed smile. "The next available flight is tomorrow evening. Extra charges apply, of course." Clara's stomach sank. "Tomorrow evening? That means I'll miss the interview completely." Her voice cracked. "Please, isn't there anything sooner?" The attendant shrugged, already typing on her keyboard. "I'm afraid not, ma'am." Clara bit her lip hard, nodding silently. The little money she had left wouldn't even cover the rebooking fee. She drifted back to the waiting area, clutching her squeaky suitcase. People bustled around her, busy, important, certain of where they were going. She felt invisible, small, and then she saw him again. The old man she had helped was seated a few rows away, cane leaning against his chair. His papers were now neatly stacked in his lap, but his eyes, they were on her, watching. Clara forced a smile, though she wanted to vanish. "Missed your flight?" he asked, his voice rough but steady. Clara let out a humorless laugh. "Yeah, because I stopped to help you. Guess that was a mistake." The man studied her, his gaze sharp despite the wrinkles around his eyes. "You think kindness is a mistake?" Clara sighed, staring down at her shoes. "Not normally, but I worked so hard for this chance. Now it's gone." The man leaned back in his seat, tapping his cane lightly on the floor. "Funny thing about chances, sometimes the ones you think you've lost are just making way for bigger ones." Clara blinked at him, unsure whether to be comforted or irritated. Easy for him to say. He wasn't the one who had just thrown away a future. Still, something in his calm, unshaken settled in her chest. He looked like just another frail old man, but his words carried weight. Clara didn't know it yet, but this was the moment her life began to turn in a direction she never could have imagined. Clara shifted uncomfortably in her chair, staring at the man's weathered face. He wasn't like the others in the airport rushing past with briefcases and expensive watches. He sat calmly, as if he had all the time in the world. She broke the silence first. "You sound like you've lost things before." The old man chuckled, low and raspy. Child, I've lost more than I can count, but I've gained too, sometimes in the strangest ways. Clara tilted her head. Yeah? Well, right now all I've gained is a missed flight and an empty wallet. His eyes sparkled faintly, a strange contrast to the deep lines of age carved across his face. You've gained me. Clara frowned, unsure if he was joking. And what exactly does that mean? The man smiled knowingly, but said nothing more. He simply adjusted his cane, then struggled to stand. Without thinking, Clara jumped up and steadied him. Where are you headed? She asked, her tone softer now. Same as you, he answered vaguely. Out west, but I missed my flight too. Clara blinked. He missed his flight too? She couldn't decide whether that was coincidence or fate. Well, she sighed, looks like we're both stuck. The man nodded, stuck together. Hours dragged by. Clara tried not to fall asleep on the stiff airport chairs. The old man, however, seemed perfectly content, occasionally humming to himself. At one point, Clara noticed him shiver. Without hesitation, she pulled her thin jacket off and draped it over his shoulders. You'll freeze, she muttered. He gave her a look that lingered longer than necessary, as though weighing something in his mind. Most people these days don't look twice at me, but you stop, even when it costs you everything. That says a lot about your heart. Clara rolled her eyes, embarrassed. Well, my heart's not going to get me a job. Don't be so sure, he whispered. Finally, the overnight hours grew cold and empty. Clara dozed off against her squeaky suitcase. When she woke at dawn, she found something strange. The old man was gone. But beside her sat a neatly folded note, scrawled in handwriting that was shaky yet firm. Sometimes delays aren't accidents. Sometimes they're doors. Don't lose hope, Jay. Clara frowned, reading it twice. She didn't even know his full name. She shrugged it off, assuming she'd never see him again. But she was very, very wrong. Clara stared at the note in her hand, the scribbled signature just J. It felt like something out of a movie, but she brushed it off. Life wasn't magical for people like her. Life was bills, delays, and being overlooked. Still, she couldn't help reading those words over and over. Sometimes delays aren't accidents, sometimes they're doors. She folded the note carefully and tucked it inside her worn wallet. By morning, the airport was buzzing with new travelers. Clara stood in line at the ticket counter, dreading the conversation. She explained her missed flight, her empty funds, her desperate need to get to California. The attendant shook her head politely. I'm sorry, ma'am. The next available flight is fully booked, unless you're able to upgrade. Upgrade, Clara scoffed. I don't even have enough for the basics. The attendant offered a tight, rehearsed smile, the kind people give when they're used to saying no. Clara stepped aside, deflated. She thought about calling her cousin to admit she wouldn't make it, but her pride held her back. She wandered into the airport cafe, ordered the cheapest tea they had, and sank into a booth. That's when she saw him again. Across the cafe, the old man Jay was sitting at a table, sipping black coffee as if nothing had happened. He looked oddly put together for someone who had spent the night in an airport, his shirt neatly pressed, his demeanor calm, almost regal. Clara blinked. You, she blurted, walking toward him. He looked up with a twinkle in his eye. Morning, Clara. Her heart jumped. Wait, how do you know my name? He smiled. You told me yesterday. I don't forget names easily. She narrowed her eyes. I didn't tell you my name. The old man only sipped his coffee, saying nothing more. Clara slid into the booth across from him, suspicion mixing with curiosity. All right, what's your deal? You show up out of nowhere, leave mysterious notes, then act like you know things you shouldn't. His lips curved in a faint grin. My deal? My dear, I'm just a traveler, like you, except I happen to own a bit more luggage. She frowned. That's not an answer. For a long moment he studied her. Then, without warning, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small leather wallet. From it, he slipped a gleaming black card onto the table. Clara's eyes widened. She'd never seen a card like that before, metallic, heavy, embossed with a name. Jonathan Pierce. It took her a second. The name sounded familiar, too familiar that her jaw dropped. Wait, Jonathan Pierce? As in, Pierce Airlines? The old man Jonathan gave a modest nod. At your service. Clara's breath caught. The man she had stayed behind for, the man she thought was just a frail stranger, owned the very airline that had cost her everything. She couldn't believe it. The owner, the billionaire. And here he was, sitting casually across from her, sipping coffee like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. "You're joking." Clara stammered. Jonathan smiled faintly. "I never joke about who I am, only about what I've lost." Her mind spun. If this was true, then why had he been sitting alone, struggling with his bag, like any ordinary traveler? Why hadn't anyone recognized him? And most importantly, why had she been the one to stop? Clara sat frozen in the booth, eyes locked on the metallic black card. She had seen wealthy people before, but Jonathan wasn't just wealthy, he was a legend. His name was on billboards, airplanes, magazines. Pierce Airlines wasn't just a company, it was an empire. And she was a broke cleaner who had missed her chance at a new life. "This doesn't make sense," Clara whispered. "Why were you alone? Why were you struggling with your bag? Don't you have people for that?" Jonathan chuckled, his voice low but rich. "People see the empire. They don't see the man. Sometimes I step away to remind myself what life feels like without walls of glass and assistants shielding me from reality." Clara still couldn't breathe. "But you sat there like I was just an old man," he finished for her. "Because that's what I am, Clara. Age humbles you. It strips away the glitter. And sometimes it takes a stranger's kindness to remind you of what matters." Her cheeks flushed. "I didn't do anything special. Anyone would have helped." He leaned forward, eyes steady on hers. "No, Clara, not everyone. Most people walked right by me. You didn't." Jonathan reached into his coat again and pulled out an envelope. He slid it across the table. Clara hesitated. "What is this?" "Open it," he urged. With trembling fingers, she tore the seal. Inside was a voucher. No, not just a voucher. It was a first-class ticket to California. Her name was already printed on it. Clara gasped. "But how?" "I made a few calls," Jonathan said calmly. "You wanted to get to California, didn't you?" Her eyes watered. "Yes, but I can't accept this." "You can," Jonathan replied firmly. "Consider it a thank you, but more than that, consider it a test." "A test?" He nodded. "I've built my life around spotting people who see beyond money, people who notice others. My airline isn't just about planes, it's about people, and people like you are rare." Clara's heart pounded. She had never thought of herself as rare, just ordinary, invisible, most of the time. She swallowed hard. "Why me?" Jonathan smiled faintly. "Because when no one else would, you stopped. And sometimes that's all it takes to change everything." Clara gripped the ticket in her hand, torn between disbelief and awe. She wanted to ask what he meant to change everything, but before she could, Jonathan rose slowly, balancing on his cane. "Enjoy your flight, Clara," he said. "We'll see each other again." And just like that, he walked away. Clara sat there long after he'd gone, staring at the golden first-class ticket, her hands trembling. She didn't know it yet, but Jonathan Pierce wasn't done with her. Not by a long shot. Clara clutched the first-class ticket so tightly, she feared the ink would rub off. She had never flown first class in her life, never even stepped into the section past the curtain. That was where people with money lived, not cleaners, not people like her. But now, somehow, her name was printed on one of those shining seats. As boarding began, Clara moved nervously down the jet bridge, her stomach twisting. She expected someone to stop her, to tell her there had been a mistake. But no, the flight attendant scanned her ticket, smiled warmly, and guided her to her seat. Seat 1A. First row, window. Clara sank into the plush leather chair, nearly trembling. The seat was wider than her entire bed back home. She stared at the sparkling glass of water already waiting, at the neatly folded blanket, at the people around her casually flipping through business magazines as if this was normal. To Clara, it felt like stepping into another world. But not everyone welcomed her. Across the aisle, a woman in designer heels shot Clara a disapproving look, whispering to her husband. Clara pretended not to notice, but the sting cut deep. She wasn't blind, she knew what they saw. A black woman in worn clothes, out of place in their world of privilege. Clara shifted uncomfortably, her palms sweating. She wanted to shrink into her seat and disappear. Then came the voice, a sharp, annoyed voice from 2 rows back. "Excuse me, miss?" Clara turned. A middle-aged businessman in a navy suit was glaring at a young flight attendant. "I've been waiting for 15 minutes. My champagne is warm. This is first class, isn't it? Where's the service?" The flight attendant's cheeks reddened. "I'll bring a fresh glass right away, sir." But the man wasn't finished. He looked around, seeking an audience. Unbelievable standards have really dropped. First it's delays, now this. What's next? They'll start letting anyone in here. His eyes flicked toward Clara. Her stomach tightened. The flight attendant rushed away, humiliated. Clara felt a wave of anger rise in her chest. She had been in that girl's shoes before, snapped at, belittled, and treated as if she were invisible. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. Silence lets the cruelest voices grow louder. Sometimes you have to be the one to speak. Clara straightened in her seat. Her hands trembled, but her voice came out steady. "Sir," she said firmly, loud enough for the cabin to hear, "that young woman is doing her job. You could show a little patience. Champagne isn't worth crushing someone's dignity." The man's jaw dropped. The woman across the aisle gasped. For a moment, the cabin was silent. Then, a passenger 2 rows up, an older woman with kind eyes, nodded. "She's right. We could all stand to be a little kinder." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the section. The businessman grumbled, turning away, suddenly stripped of his power. The flight attendant, now returning with a new glass, looked at Clara with eyes full of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. Clara smiled softly. "Don't mention it." As the plane climbed into the sky, Clara leaned back against the leather seat. She didn't know who was watching, didn't know that her words had already been noticed by the very man who had put her on this plane. Jonathan Pierce was testing her character, and once again, she had passed without even realizing. Clara settled back into her seat, her heart still pounding from the confrontation. She wasn't used to speaking up, not in a world where her voice was often overlooked. But something inside her had shifted when she saw the flight attendant's relief. It felt worth it. Still, she couldn't shake the burning stares from the businessman behind her, nor the sideways glances from the woman across the aisle. She adjusted her seatbelt and forced herself to breathe. Then a flight attendant approached her quietly. "Miss Clara?" Clara blinked. "Yes?" The attendant leaned closer. "The captain would like to speak with you after we land." Her brows furrowed. "With me? Why?" The attendant only smiled knowingly. "You'll see." The rest of the flight was a blur. Clara tried to distract herself by staring out the window, watching clouds drift like cotton fields in the sky. She thought of her cousin waiting in California, of the job interview she was already late for. Would any of this matter if she missed that chance? But something in her gut told her this flight was her chance, just not in the way she had planned. When the plane touched down in California, passengers stood and grabbed their bags. Clara waited nervously, clutching her worn handbag. She had no idea what she'd say to the captain or why he even wanted to see her. As she stepped off the plane, an attendant guided her not toward the exit, but down a private hallway. Her stomach tightened. What is happening? At the end of the hall, a door opened. Inside stood Jonathan Pierce, the old man, the billionaire. He wasn't alone this time. 2 executives in crisp suits flanked him, their expressions serious, but Jonathan himself was smiling. "Clara," he greeted warmly, "I told you we'd see each other again." Her breath caught. "You were here on the plane?" Jonathan chuckled. "Of course, seat 2C, hidden in plain sight." Her jaw dropped. She had been so focused on her own discomfort, she hadn't even noticed. Jonathan's eyes twinkled. "I heard what you did. Speaking up like that, it takes courage. Most people stay silent, but not you." Clara's cheeks flushed. I couldn't let him treat her like that. I've been in her shoes." Jonathan nodded. "Exactly. You spoke, not because it benefited you, but because it was right. That's the kind of voice I want in my company." Clara blinked. "Your company?" He stepped closer, his cane tapping softly on the polished floor. "Clara, I don't believe in chance. I believe in doors. And I think the door you opened for me yesterday is one I must now open for—" He gestured to the executives beside him. "Meet Andrew, head of corporate affairs, and Lisa, director of outreach. They've been searching for someone real, someone who understands people, not just numbers, and I think we've found her." Clara's voice shook. "But I'm just a cleaner. I don't have degrees or humor." Jonathan raised a hand gently. "Clara, you have what money can't buy. Integrity, compassion, strength. I can teach skills. I can't teach heart." Tears welled in Clara's eyes. For so long she had been invisible, her worth measured in hours and wages. And now, this man, a billionaire, was telling her she had something priceless. Jonathan's voice softened. "I want to offer you a position at Pierce Airlines. Not as a cleaner, as part of my team. You'll learn, you'll grow, and you'll change lives, just as you changed mine when you stopped for a tired old man. Clara's breath caught. The world around her blurred. All she could see was Jonathan's steady, kind eyes. This wasn't just a chance. This was destiny. Clara's throat tightened as Jonathan's words echoed in her ears. I want to offer you a position at Pierce Airlines, not as a cleaner, but as part of my team. She wanted to believe it. She wanted to leap into that promise with her whole heart, but the doubts crept in like shadows. She lowered her eyes. Mr. Pierce, I don't think I'm the right person. I don't belong in boardrooms or offices. I don't have degrees. I don't have training. I don't even own a proper suit. Jonathan chuckled gently, as if he'd expected that response. Clara, do you think I built my empire by hiring people who already had everything? No. I built it by finding people with something far rarer: vision, grit, humanity. Clara shook her head. But I'm just an ordinary, simple woman trying to survive. Jonathan's gaze sharpened. Clara, ordinary people are the ones who change the world because they understand it. Don't ever call yourself simple again. Lisa, the director of outreach, stepped forward. Mr. Pierce doesn't exaggerate, Clara. We've sat across from hundreds of polished candidates with resumes thicker than novels, but very few would have done what you did. You've already proven you have the courage to speak when it matters. Andrew, the corporate affairs executive, added, and people like that, they're the kind who make companies worth believing in. Clara's hands trembled. For the first time in her life, she felt like her voice truly mattered. Jonathan leaned on his cane and studied her. But this is your decision. I won't force it. You can walk away, catch your cousin's train, and live the life you planned. Or you can step into something bigger, something you never dreamed possible. The choice is yours. The room fell silent. Clara's mind raced. She thought of her cousin waiting at the bus station. She thought of the cleaning shifts she'd left behind, the exhaustion, the invisibility. She thought of her mother's tired hands scrubbing floors, always whispering, "One day, Clara, I pray your life will be different." Her chest tightened. Maybe this was that day. But still the fear of failing, of stepping into a world she didn't understand, of being laughed at, looked down upon, crushed by the weight of expectations. Clara swallowed hard. What if I'm not good enough? Jonathan's eyes softened. Then you'll learn. And if you stumble, you'll rise again. Because what matters most, Clara, is that you try, and I'll be there to make sure you don't walk this path alone. His words struck something deep inside her. For so long she had been alone. But now someone believed in her. A billionaire, yes, but more than that. A man who saw her heart when the world had overlooked it. Clara closed her eyes. When she opened them, her voice was steady. Okay, she said, whispered. I'll do it. Jonathan's face broke into a smile, not of triumph, but of quiet satisfaction, like a man who had just found what he was searching for. 2 weeks later, Clara stood in front of the towering glass headquarters of Pierce Airlines. The building rose like a monument to wealth and power, its mirrored surface reflecting the sky. People in sharp suits moved quickly through the revolving doors, briefcases in their hand with eyes full of purpose. Clara's hands shook as she clutched the strap of her handbag. She had bought the only office outfit she could afford, an off-the-rack blouse and skirt that didn't quite fit. Her shoes pinched her toes. She felt like an imposter about to be discovered. Breathe, Clara, she whispered to herself. You said yes. Now walk in. The receptionist greeted her politely, but with a flicker of surprise when Clara gave her name. Clara could almost hear the unspoken question. She's the one Jonathan personally hired? Within minutes, Lisa, the outreach director she'd met at the airport, arrived to welcome her. Lisa's warm smile put Clara at ease, though she still felt the stares of passing employees. Come on, Lisa said. Let me show you your office. Clara almost tripped. Office? Wait, you mean a desk? Lisa chuckled. No, Clara, an office. And sure enough, when they arrived on the 10th floor, Clara was led into a small but private room with glass walls, a desk, and even her own computer. Clara froze. All my life I've scrubbed floors, and now I have a door with my name on it. Her eyes blurred with tears. She blinked them back quickly before Lisa noticed. But the honeymoon didn't last. On her very first day, Clara attended a meeting with department heads. She sat quietly at the long oak table, feeling small among the polished executives. When Jonathan entered the room, everyone stood. Clara hesitated, unsure if she should too. Jonathan's eyes flicked to her with a reassuring smile. But not everyone was as welcoming. Halfway through the meeting, one of the executives, a tall man named Richard, leaned toward her and whispered, "First time in a boardroom? Try not to slow us down." Clara's cheeks burned. She said nothing, staring at her notepad. She wanted to shrink into her chair. But Jonathan had noticed. His cane tapped against the floor as he addressed the group. "Before we move on, Clara, would you share your thoughts on the new passenger service model we're testing?" The room fell silent. Clara's throat tightened. Me? Share my thoughts? In front of them? Her mind screamed to stay quiet, but Jonathan's steady gaze urged her forward. She cleared her throat. "Well, I don't know much about models or projections," she began nervously. "But I do know what it feels like to be invisible. If you really want passengers to choose your airline, don't just serve them drinks to make them feel seen. Train your staff to notice people, not just tickets." The room blinked at her. Richard smirked. "That's cute." But Jonathan's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Insightful," he corrected firmly. "Numbers don't build loyalty. People do." Clara's heart soared. For the first time, her voice had weight in a world she never imagined she'd step into. As the meeting ended, Clara felt both exhilarated and terrified. She had spoken, but she had also made enemies. She could see it in Richard's eyes. This was no fairy tale. This was a battlefield, and Clara would have to prove she belonged here, not just to Jonathan Pierce, but to everyone watching and waiting for her to fail. Richard's smile as the meeting ended looked polished, but his eyes burned. He watched Clara leave the boardroom, shoulders straight, as if she had earned her place among them. "How dare she?" he muttered under his breath. To Richard, the boardroom was sacred, reserved for pedigrees, for Ivy League degrees, for men and women who had paid their dues in corporate corridors, not for a black woman who once scrubbed bathrooms with bleach-stained hands. As he gathered his papers, Dr. Vega caught his eye. "You shouldn't underestimate her," she said softly. Richard's jaw tightened. "She won't last." That evening, in the quiet of his corner office, Richard began his work. He opened his laptop and pulled Clara's employee profile. He found out that she doesn't have a college degree, no certifications, and no professional experience. He smirked. "Let's see how long you can stand when the truth catches up with you." Meanwhile, Clara walked home in the cool night air, replaying the meeting in her mind. Relief still washed over her, but doubts whispered at the edges. "You're just playing pretend, Clara," the voice in her head said. "One day they'll see right through you." She pushed the thought away and entered her tiny apartment. On the table sat a single-framed photo of her late mother, who used to tell her, "Clara, you were made to shine, even in the shadows." Clara touched the frame. "Mama, I hope I'm doing this right." The following week, Richard struck. At the Monday briefing, he stood before the team, his tone smooth and casual. "Quick announcement," he said, glancing at Clara. "We'll be implementing a more structured approach to presentations. From now on, all reports must include full statistical breakdowns, predictive models, and financial implications. No exceptions." A few executives shifted uncomfortably. Everyone knew this was aimed at Clara. Richard added with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "We need to uphold a standard here." Clara's stomach sank. She didn't know how to build financial models. She barely understood half the jargon Richard had used. Jonathan, seated at the end of the table, raised an eyebrow. He said nothing for now. Later, Lisa rushed into Clara's office, eyes flashing. "He's trying to trap you. Don't let him." Clara groaned. "Lisa, I can't do what he's asking. I don't even know where to start." Lisa leaned in. "Then learn. Prove him wrong. I'll help you." Clara looked up, hope flickering. "You'd do that?" "Of course," Lisa said with a grin. "Richard thinks the only kind of knowledge that matters comes from books. But you've got something he doesn't care about. Combine that with the tools, and he won't know what hit him." And so, nights found Clara hunched over Lisa's kitchen table. Lisa patiently explained spreadsheets, charts, and formulas. Clara's head hurt, but she pushed on, scribbling notes furiously. One evening, Clara slammed her pencil down. "This is impossible. I'm too far behind." Lisa smiled. "Clara, do you know what I see when I look at you? I see a black woman who gave up her seat on a plane to help a stranger. That kind of courage, that can't be taught. Don't give up." Clara swallowed hard and nodded. By the time the next presentation rolled around, Clara stood taller. She didn't have Richard's polish, but she had something else, authenticity wrapped in newfound skill. When she presented her report complete with charts Lisa had helped her build, there was a ripple of surprise around the room. Clara explained the numbers in plain human language that everyone understood. Jonathan smiled, full of pride in his eyes. Dr. Vega nodded along. Richard, however, clenched his jaw so hard his teeth ached. Clara wasn't breaking. She was rising. Richard's frustration boiled like acid in his veins. Each time he tried to corner Clara, she rose again. She wasn't supposed to last this long. She wasn't supposed to belong. So he dug deeper. He hired a private investigator to scour Clara's history. What he found, he thought, was his golden ticket. Eviction notices, years of menial work, medical debts, and a juvenile misdemeanor from when Clara was just 15 years old. Richard smiled cruelly. The board will eat this alive. At the quarterly shareholders' meeting with executives, staff, and press gathered, Richard made his move. He stood with file in hand and addressed Jonathan Pierce directly. "Mr. Pierce," Richard said smoothly, "I think the board and our investors deserve transparency regarding recent hires." Clara's stomach dropped. Richard turned to the crowd. "Our so-called consultant, Miss Clara Brown, is not a professional. She is a cleaner with no degree or credentials, a history of financial instability. And let's not forget," he smirked, "a juvenile record." Gasps echoed across the hall. Cameras clicked. Whispers rippled like a wave. Clara's knees trembled. She wanted the floor to open and swallow her whole. But before she could speak, Jonathan Pierce stood slowly, leaning on his cane. His voice carried through the room, sharp as steel. "Enough." The hall fell silent. Jonathan's eyes blazed. Yes, Clara was a cleaner. Yes, she has known struggle. But what Richard failed to mention is this. When others turn their backs, Clara steps forward. When I collapsed, it was Clara, not Richard, who gave me water, steadied my steps, and treated me with dignity. She did not see a billionaire. She saw a human being. Jonathan's cane struck the floor, and it is because of her past that she sees people clearly. That perspective is worth more than all of Richard's degrees combined. A hush swept the room. Then, unexpectedly, applause began soft at first, then louder, spreading across the hall. Clara blinked back tears. Richard's face turned pale. In the weeks that followed, Clara's role transformed. Jonathan appointed her as Director of Human Experience, a newly created position designed to rebuild the airline's relationship with its passengers and staff. Some resisted, but many rallied around her. Clara listened to both the janitors and the captains, the ticketing clerks and the managers. She proposed simple changes: better staff rest areas, more empathetic customer policies, training that emphasized kindness as much as efficiency. Within months, satisfaction scores soared. The company's reputation shifted. Passengers spoke of feeling seen and valued. Behind it all stood Clara, once dismissed as just a cleaner. As Clara rose, Richard fell. His plots became desperate, sloppy. The board uncovered his misuse of company funds for personal perks. At his termination hearing, Richard sneered at Clara. "You'll never truly belong here." Clara met his eyes calmly. "I already do, because belonging isn't given by people like you. It's built on one act of dignity at a time." Richard had no answer. Security escorted him out. Months later, Clara stood in the VIP lounge of Pierce Airline's flagship terminal. On the wall hung a new plaque, dedicated to the unsung hands who keep us flying. Jonathan Pierce, frailer now, leaned on her arm as they unveiled it together. He whispered, "Clara, you reminded me what this company was always meant to stand for. Not for profit, but for people." Clara's throat tightened. "All I did was what anyone should do." Jonathan smiled. "No, you did what most wouldn't." That evening, Clara walked home under the fading city lights. The same woman who once scrubbed floors now carried a quiet authority, but she had never lost her humility. At a crosswalk, she paused to help an elderly woman with her groceries. No cameras, no applause, just kindness. Because that was Clara, and sometimes the smallest acts change the largest worlds. In a world obsessed with power and prestige, a simple black woman showed that dignity can be more powerful than any title. She missed her flight to help an old man, never knowing he owned the airline. But in the end, it wasn't his wealth that changed her life. It was her heart that changed his, and the company he built. If this story reminded you that true greatness comes not from what we have, but from how we treat each other, then let it live in you too. And if it touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that prove humanity has no color.